thank you all for being here for our series of educational quick sessions. We're tagging it as We Found Community, which is something that Southern States Management Group is coining as kind of a tagline or brand. So as we do these on a regular basis, we'll do current topics and kind of spend 45 minutes or an hour and do some Q&A at the end. And we are fortunate to have partners within our community association management realm that are good partners to help educate our clients, ourselves, and they also serve a portion of our portfolio. And so today I have the pleasure of having my good friend Rich Cooper from Halifax Insurance Partners. They're local in Daytona, Ormond Beach area and have been around for a very long time. And I'm gonna let him give a quick introduction and then we'll kind of get started. Before we go, we are recording this to add to our educational series that's online. I got one more person joining here, so I'm going to do a quick introduction again when he gets on, and then we'll let Rich introduce himself in 1 second. All right, we got David. You just joined. We just got started. I'm introducing one of our professional partners and my good friend Rich Cooper from Halifax Insurance Partners. He's going to tell us a little bit about his organization, and then we're going to kind of go into a little bit of a back and forth on the hurricane preparedness and horror stories. Rich?
Thanks a lot, Troy. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Rich Cooper, Halifax Insurance Partners. Troy said that we've been around for a long time, and if you trace our roots, we certainly have. I was formerly the principal of Mitchell Knoll Insurance, which dates back in the area doing property and casualty insurance to 1956. About 3.5 years ago, we sold our company and merged in with a new group that was starting, a group of executives from another local agency. Reams Employee Benefits as well came in, and a few other insurance professionals in the area. We all joined forces and created this new company, Halifax Insurance Partners. We're a full lines independent insurance agency. We offer all lines of insurance, including personal home and homeowners, personal auto. We do condominium and homeowners associations. We do all kinds of businesses, group employee benefits, a little bit of everything. We're part of Foundation Risk Partners, which is our national platform headquartered here in Daytona. And at this point, we're in, I think, 14 states now. We have over 1,000 employees. So we have a very good background in all areas and aspects of insurance and professionals in all those areas. Thank you for letting me join you today.
Thanks, Rich. And I serve on the Ormond Chamber Board with Rich, so we get to lead community businesses in a different capacity, but all along the same lines, just trying to implement best practices and be resourceful to our clients and our fellow associates and their clients. We got a couple more people that joined. Thank you guys for joining. I'm Troy Railsback, Southern States Management Group. This is our We Found Community kind of a lunch series, and hopefully everyone has a brown bag and they're having a snack while we're going to just talk a little bit about hurricane preparedness and horror stories. Real quickly, we are recording this, so by joining, you allow us the express written consent to add this to our portfolio of resources from our educational series and use it for those types of purposes. And for those of you who just joined, Rich Cooper is one of our professional resources that we're going to collaborate with today, and I'm happy to have them. So one of the summertime focuses, you know, in the community management business, we're not doing a budget then, we're not necessarily doing an annual meeting. We're, you know, kind of in the throes of landscape issues, and we're watching hurricane storms. We're wondering, are we going to get hit, and what does that mean for our association? And if you have been with Southern States Management Group or been around any of our educational series, our primary focus is to be proactive as best we can, and then when necessary, when the storm hits or an emergency happens, we do our best to be reactive. And so part of what we want to convey today is how do we do that? I mean, you know, we're fortunate that we don't live in the Midwest and a tornado doesn't pop up and strike, you know, one of our coastal communities, but it can happen. So as we talk about hurricanes, we have the fortunate benefit of typically seeing them days and weeks in advance of whether they're going to impact our area or not. So I'm going to just talk a little bit, and then I'm going to throw it back to Rich. So one of the things that I have my board president on the call, and he can attest to this. His name is Dr. Robert Carlton. We've been fortunate to serve that community for over 12 years. And along the way, we had a very stagnant hurricane season for years and years and years. And then, you know, 2016, 2017, we all know that we had a lot of activity and we had a lot to learn from. And so we're going to convey some of that today. So post-storm, after we had a very, I wouldn't say robust, and I wouldn't say minimal, but just a standard action plan. What happens? What furniture do we put up in our common areas? What do we do with our vendors? How do we get cleaned up? We had a protocol sheet written out, and what we did at post-storm is we went right to task and identified opportunities for us to be better prepared and then to be better in the reactive mode post-storm. So I'm going to turn it over to Rich because as part of your budgeting process, you're contemplating insurance policies. It could be happening during the storm season. It could be happening at the end of the year. It could be happening in February or whenever. But one of the things that you should be aware of is what happens when a storm hits, and what do we need to tell our insurance agent before and or after, and what are the guts of our policy? What does it mean when a storm, wind event, flood issue, those types of things? And obviously, as I said, Rich is an expert in that arena, so I'm going to turn it over to him, and he's going to highlight, you know, what does the insurance policy look like, what should it look like, and what does it mean on a calendar or per event basis? And take it over, Rich.
Thanks a lot, Troy. Yeah, so a few things. You pointed out some highlights there that I'm definitely going to cover. The one thing to remember, Troy was talking about before, when a hurricane's coming, we like to have a checklist of things that we need to do and check on, because we see that a storm is out there and it's coming, what furniture to put away and things like that. I will tell you that is not the time to check on your insurance policy. Generally speaking, when we get the storms that are close and they get within a certain, we call it the box, or when they get a certain miles, or it looks like they may impact our you know, Florida somewhere, insurance companies go on a lockdown situation where they will not allow you to make any changes or alterations to your policy. So in that situation, maybe for peace of mind, it's good to call your agent and say, hey, is my policy in force? Does it cover this? But on the other hand, if it were not, or it did not, you wouldn't be able to make any changes at that point. So my point there is the time to check on your insurance policies and to talk with your agent is sometime before June 1st. And, you know, and typically there's a renewal period that you have, that window when your policies renew. Here we're talking about property and wind policies. You want to definitely be talking to your agent 60 to 90, even sometimes more than that, ahead of time, and talking about that what's coming up and those changes. And something that we, I know you're not in budget season, most of you, but we need to consider here with the environment, insurance environment right now, is we are seeing increases this year, property increases, flood increases. You're going to see it in some other areas as well, but you're going to see 15 to 20% increases in your premiums. And I don't know if I insure any of you or not, but I mean, that doesn't matter who your agent is. That's the state of the market, and that's something that we're going to be seeing and we need to be looking for. So some other important things, though, when you are talking to your agent about your policy, or you're reviewing your policy, some important things that we need to consider. One of those is, are you insured for the proper value? Okay, so state law requires that you, as a condo or a homeowners association, any common property, you get an updated appraisal every 36 months. And I've heard actually that I think it's Department of Professional Regulation, or I can't remember which entity governs that, but they've been going out and doing inspections and requesting copies of the um, most recent appraisal. And if you don't have it, you're not in compliance, and they can charge you up to $5,000 per infraction. But other than that, it's a great thing to have, get an independent appraisal every 36 months. That way, you know, the insurance carrier knows, your agent knows what the actual replacement cost value is of your property, and we want to be insuring to that effect. We don't want to end up in a situation where there's damage to a building and you get a co-insurance penalty, or there's just simply not enough funds to make full repairs, and we end up doing having to do an assessment to the other unit owners. Next thing that we really want to look at when we get into our policy, if we know we're insuring to the right amount, we want to look at our wind deductible. And a wind deductible can be many things. So there's what's called a wind deductible, and that's just any kind of wind. It's a tornado, it's a nor'easter. That there's a deductible that applies to wind. Another type of deductible is a named storm deductible. So that would apply to anything. It could be a hurricane or a tropical storm. As long as once they put a name on it, that deductible comes into effect. There's another one that's strictly a hurricane. So if it's not, when it hits your area, if it's not at a hurricane level, that hurricane deductible doesn't apply, and another deductible could apply. So that could be the other wind. So a lot of times on a policy, we'll see, let's say, a 3% hurricane deductible and a $10,000 other wind. So if it's a hurricane, they're going to charge you the 3%. If it's an other wind, it's going to be $10,000. So that hurricane deductible, what's important to know on that? It's usually going to be a percentage. I would say in most cases for you guys, it's going to be a percentage. And what that percentage represents is the total value insured at a particular location or a building. And we got to know specifically what that applies to. So in other words, just to make things simple, if you have a $100,000 building and you have a 5% wind deductible, you have a $5,000 wind deductible. It's not 5% of the claim or the damage, it's 5% of the structure that you're insuring. Now, on occasion, there'll be policies that have a per location deductible. So where we can run into trouble is in the same situation. I'm using lower values, but for simplicity. But if we had 10 buildings at $100,000 each, we had minor damage to all of them, but some damage. Now there's a per location deductible that could apply, and it would be, or it could be one building, but the per location deductible is going to be the total insured value at that location, which 10 buildings times 100,000, we've got $1 million. So now that 5% applies to that $1 million of property value, and you would have a $50,000 deductible. So these are just all things that, and this is all very common in the insurance world for property in this area. But we just want to know for sure when you're budgeting and you're putting reserves away, we want to know what is the maximum probable loss that we could sustain financially if there was a major event. Other thing to remember, in most policies now are going to have a calendar year deductible rather than a per occurrence deductible. So it wasn't a big deal before. Nobody really thought of this, but back before 2004, when we had several hurricanes, you would have a per occurrence deductible often, and nobody thought anything of it. But what happened that year is many insureds, whether they were homeowners, condo associations, other businesses, they suffered 3 consecutive losses. Charlie, Francis, and was it Jean? I can't remember the other one. But those 3 in a row, they suffered 3 distinct claims. And it was a per occurrence deductible. So they got hit with 3 wind deductibles in a row. Even though it was some overlapping damage, similar damage, they ended up having to pay out 3 different deductibles before they recouped any payment from the insurance carrier. So now what a lot of carriers are doing, most carriers are doing, is they're applying a calendar year deductible as far as wind goes. So if you get hit with a hurricane in August, you pay one deductible for that hurricane, and it doesn't matter if you have subsequent hurricanes in, October and November. You've already paid your deductible and you're done. Troy, do you want me to keep going, or you want to cover anything here?
No, I'll jump back in real quick. So in keeping it in to the theme of horror stories is, be in the know. When the storm hits, if you haven't contemplated on how a storm or a second storm impacts your community, then that's the horror story. That's where you're either underfunded because you have a $2.5 million piece of property and your appraisal said it was only valued at 1.8 million, and now you have an exposure of $70,000 or $700,000. I mean that's a horror story. And as you lean on your insurance professional, and I know we do it in our associations, is we would go to our Rich Cooper and we would have him present, whether it's in an email format or at a board meeting, what does all of this mean? Tell us what this means when you have a loss, how it's going to impact your community in the different circumstances. And this session here is designed so that you are armed with those types of questions to ask your agent. And if they can't answer them, then I would encourage you to make sure that they can, or you may have to deviate from what you have in place now. There's no there's no reason that they can't walk you through what you have in place and then advise you on how to fill the holes or mitigate exposure or minimize wind damage or a wind deductible. A wind deductible, and Rich can speak to this, it can flex. It can be a lower number or even a higher number, and it would affect the premium. A lower wind deductible is going to give you a higher premium what you pay, and vice versa. So anyways, I want to make sure everyone, as you exit this session, you are taking notes, and that's a good note-taking session. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm gonna start building what our associations are advised, and what I personally do with my association is post-storm events. Recently, we went through our whole action plan again, and one of the main pieces of information that the association needs to consider is, when do you put the action plan into place? So as a board, I would recommend you identify when do you have the janitorial or the service contractor or the management company or whoever's going to put the furniture away and start, locking things up and taking the steps on the action plan. When does it start? We personally feel like having a named storm warning in the county that the association resides in, that's when our action plan comes into play. That's when we're closing amenities, we're putting furniture away, you can't use the pool anymore. And the other thing from a proactive standpoint is you want to make these things transparent. There's no secret that the board or the management company should be keeping from the rest of the membership. When you identify what this action plan is, you don't have to put it every little nitty-gritty detail, but things like, when are you going to close the pool down? Well, our action plan comes into play when the named event becomes a named warning in the county that you live in, period. And then until that passes, then the amenity is closed down. And from a condominium standpoint or an HOA, you typically have common area, you do have things that the association needs to do, and then you're going to identify things that owners are expected to do. And this is very important in our condominium clients. I have colleagues in my office that they're condominium specialists, and part of their protocol is to identify a time certain date after that named storm warning comes into effect, when the association is going to check your lanai or your patio or whatever it is, to make sure all of your stuff has been removed so it doesn't affect anyone else's unit or common area, because it becomes something that's been picked up in the wind, with the wind. And the last piece of that is, if the association has to hire or use its resources to move all your stuff in, you are going to get charged for that. Again, make that very front and center. It's not uncommon for an owner to have a unit that they don't reside in 100% of the time, whether it's particularly in a condominium, and they may not be able to get into town to move the stuff. So identify what that's going to cost the owner so they know it in advance and they can rely on that as a resource. And the association can understand that if occupancy is typically at 40% and they're going to have to do, say there's 100 units, they're going to have to do this to 40 units. How many man hours is it going to take, and how many people is it going to take to do this in a timely fashion? And understanding that you're going to pay for that in advance and then recoup it from the owner, but put that plan, think that through, understand what the plan of action comes into play. And the last wrinkle now is you never know what type of event like COVID or social distancing or whatever it may be, where everyone's scurrying around, but are you able to accomplish what I've identified as your action protocol in a timely manner before the storm hits? So as you build your action item list, one of the most important key points is when does it come into effect, and what the association, and you should have a list of what the association is going to do, and then a list of what owners are supposed to do. And so I think that is a very key framework or platform to build your action on. Everyone's is going to be a little bit different, but identify when it starts, identify what the association's going to do, who's going to do it, and then what the owners are expected to do. And if you don't do it, what happens next? And so that would be, the next point is to, if it, from a horror story standpoint, if the association doesn't take its action plan seriously and try to identify all the things it needs to do and identify when it starts, then you have a very quickly approaching storm. You think it's going to curve, and it takes, and go to South Florida or something, and it takes a last, push north, and it hits you in 2 or 3 days, and you have 40 condominium units and no resources to move any furniture or anything from a common area standpoint or an association member's unit standpoint. And now you have collateral damage above and beyond what was already going to happen because you weren't prepared, you weren't reactive, or you weren't proactive, and you had to be the best you can be reactive. You just simply didn't have enough time or resources to accomplish what you needed to. I guess, one of the next things, I'll throw it back to you, to Rich, and let's talk about some post-storm, protocol. What do you do? And I'll build that into the action plan after you say, what happens? The storm came through. What should the association do then? And from an insurance resource standpoint, what are you or the carriers expecting that the association does?
All right. Well, there's two important things that you got to remember with your insurance policy, or even with a unit owner's insurance policy, is you have two duties as an insured. You've got to do everything you can to mitigate the loss, to try to prevent, and then to try to minimize the loss after the fact. And then you also have to, if there is a claim, you have to report it to the insurance company in a timely manner. So one thing, Troy and I were talking about this the other day, one of the important things is that we get into each unit, whether it's any common, when there's common property, we need to make sure we get into each unit within 24 hours after it's safe. Okay, we don't want folks going in there when there's still 50 mile per hour winds, but we do need you to get in there and take a look. A lot of times, and this is a story that I have from one of my clients. We happen to insure the unit owner, and we insured the association. So there was a storm. These were absentee unit owners. They came and spent the winters typically in Florida, and then they were back up north somewhere during the rest of the year. So this is a couple years ago, one of the storms. There was a storm that came through. It didn't appear that they had any damage to their unit. There was some damage in some other parts of the the condo association, but their area appeared to be fine from the exterior anyway. One of the neighbors had a little bit of water in their unit. They got in there quick enough, and they vacuumed it up with a shop vac. Never even put it in a claim or anything. But these units didn't, their neighbors told them, and I guess the manager said, no, it looks like everything's fine. everything was locked up. You didn't have any damage. So nobody went into their unit. They get down about 6 weeks later, and some moisture had gotten through. And this is one of those things, another term I'm going to use that you need to make sure is on your policy. It's called wind-driven rain. And sometimes it's covered and sometimes it's not. It varies from policy to policy. But that is when, typically, if you get rain in your building, inside your unit or inside any building, it's due to direct physical damage. So in other words, the wind blew the roof off a little bit or blew something through the window. And so that's how all the rain got in. That's typically going to be a covered cause of loss. But sometimes they have what's called wind-driven rain, and it can be excluded unless there's an endorsement in there to include it, which we always try to include. Wind-driven rain is when water blows so hard that it makes it in around the window seals or underneath the doors or even around the sliders, which does happen quite a bit. We've any of us that have been through these hurricanes, we see that happen. So you end up getting water intrusion into the building, even though there's no physical damage to the exterior of the building. And the problem here was they did have some coverage for wind-driven rain, but the problem was it didn't get noticed, and of course it's warm, and the electricity was out for several days afterwards, and we developed quite a mold problem in that unit. So they come down 6 weeks later. They've got mold all inside their unit. Their neighbor is starting to get mold in their unit. And so the association and the unit owner, everybody's got a problem. I believe it ended up getting worked out, but it was not easy. It was not, I believe there was some mediation that had to take effect. It wasn't a pleasant experience for anyone involved. So that's, if I could give any advice, it would be you definitely need to get in and have a mechanism in place for checking the units within 24 to 48 hours after an event, because we want to make sure if there is any damage or water, especially inside a unit, we want to get it repaired as quickly as possible. And we want to get the carriers all on notice as quickly as possible. And that generally includes the association's insurance carrier and the unit owner's insurance carrier. We want to notify them both, and we want to give them contact information, each other's contact information, and hopefully they can work out who's responsible for what. The other thing that I want to talk about that's important, it's called the chaotic post-hurricane environment. So after a hurricane, typically Troy's got enough people on a daily basis to handle, all the things that come in on a regular basis that a property manager or a property would need. In other words, if you have a minor electrical problem, if you have a landscaping issue, he's got people for that. If you got a question on a claim, let's say you had a vehicle back over your sign or something like that, I'm available. I would come right on out and talk to you about it. Post-hurricane, it's a little different, right? Sometimes phone lines aren't working. Resources are maxed out. Troy doesn't have anybody to send over. I can't get out there right away. There's a lot of things going on like that. So that's why having a plan in place, as Troy referred to, is very important. Having vendors that are going to be preferred vendors that are going to come out and take care of you instead of somebody else that's calling them is very important. It's just the things you got to watch out for are these unscrupulous vendors that could show up because they're looking for an opportunity. We're here in Florida, and within a day or two, you have people coming from Texas that are showing up. And if you sign on the dotted line, they will solve all your problems. There's a thing called assignment of benefits. And basically, they can have you sign. They say, well, look, we realize your roof is damaged. We'll fix it. We'll file a claim with your insurance carrier. We just need you to sign here, and we'll take care of everything. You need to be weary of that and leery of that. Because often what will happen is they take what would be, in most cases, a $100,000 claim, and they turn it into a $300,000. They pad it. They do a lot of work that maybe doesn't need to be done. They overcharge for certain things, and it's very hard for the insurance company to fight that after it occurs. This is one of the things to look out for. And what you might say, well, what does that matter? The insurance company's paying for it. We're not paying for it. But what happens is Now you have, if you're switching from one carrier to another, whether it's because the carrier non-renews you or you just want to get a better price, you have to provide to the new carrier, the prospective new carrier, what's called the loss runs, which are going to show any claims you've had in the past. So it affects you adversely if you have a $300,000 claim as opposed to a $100,000 claim. So that's all I would caution you. You're definitely you're mitigating the future expenses of insurance by being a little savvy in that situation and being prepared for that chaotic situation where people may seem to be trying to help you, but in the long run, they might actually hurt you. Troy, you want to take it back?
Yep, good stuff, Rich. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it looks like in your action plan. Some of the things that Rich talked about. So talk about preferred vendors. And before we go there, let's also talk about who else within the immediate area is a resource or someone you need to coordinate with as you navigate through a post-storm, your post-storm protocol. So in I would say in 100% of the cases, there's a municipal entity, a county or city that they're providing resources or information, and you want to make sure that a communication channel to one of the board members, if not all the board members in the management company, is something that is channeled to you. Remember, the management company is going to get the stuff. And in some cases they're managing multiple associations in multiple municipalities and counties across the state. So as a board member, it behooves one of the board members to be kind of get the information, identify the important factual things, how it interfaces with your protocol, and that board member can potentially send it out to the rest of the board. Okay. So your protocol is going to have let's get prepared action items, and you're going to secure your site as Rich alluded to. The insurance company is looking for you to prepare your site. So I'm not going to talk about specifics on every single association about preparing your site, but you need to secure all of the amenities and all the things that you need to do and make sure the place is safe. Okay. So what happens afterwards? So if you have a master association or a condominium within a different association or a phased condominium where you have two associations, it benefits the association to collaboratively identify who's doing what and when it's going to get done, and incorporate that as part of your plan, and identify areas of responsibility for each of the associations or entities. So I think one of the most significant things after a storm is just debris cleanup. Okay. And so from a best practices standpoint, I'm going to cheerlead the association that I manage. Again, the board president's on the Zoom meeting. So I truly believe we've done a magnificent job at building what our protocol is and identifying. And I can tell you, every time we have a storm event, we look at it and we reevaluate whether it's the right protocol or not. And so as an example, we have a larger entity, a community development district that does certain things. We have a private individual property owner responsibility, and then we have an association responsibility in certain areas where we do landscape work around townhomes and stuff like that. So specifically telling each of those association members in the entire community what everyone's going to do is a mosaic of protocols coming together to paint this really big picture that we want to execute after the storm, right? So the CDD is going to do certain things on common areas, cleared main access roads. Our association is going to do certain things in the landscaped areas. We're going to, we're going to pre-authorize our vendors to remove debris from emergency access vehicles and homeowners accessing to and from their units. So it's tree falls, it falls towards the house, it blocks the door or the garage door or whatever. We're telling our vendor, we want you to chop that tree up, put it on the side of the road, get it ready for the CDD to pick it up, and we're going to pay you for that. No questions asked. We're going to also tell them to develop a list of trees that can be saved that are just leaning over a little bit, and that's going to be our phase 2, and we're going to authorize them to do that at a certain point in time. Owners have the responsibility to address that tree, and the association can help facilitate that, but it's a unique storm damage to that individual property that owner owns that tree. So we've identified protocol for this association to handle that circumstance. Again, I'm telling you, this is a mosaic of little tidbits of things that need to be done all throughout the association or the community or around the building. So look at each of the specific information. It's a little different in a condominium and an HOA when you have fee simple property and the association may be doing some work on the property. So be forthcoming in advance of the storm. We are e-blasting our protocol and letting our owners know this is what's going to happen. This is what we did in the past. Here's how we tweaked it, or nothing's changed here type thing. And we're letting them know hurricane season's coming. We're going to process and facilitate the same way. And, God willing, we won't have any storms, but this is what we're going to do. And again, this is all done in advance. So one other key point, and Rich alluded to this, no communication, no power. So our association had identified a significant break in the ability to communicate using local resources. So the association challenged us to say we want to be able to e-blast during and or after the storm, particularly after the storm. How do we do that? What happens? Is there someone that we can you do it as the management company? Can our association members do it? We want to be able to do that. So we've put a redundant host of email to send e-blasts. As long as someone has even a phone, they can send an email to the entire community. And so thinking through those types of things will again have a sense of calm and organized behavior of what owners should be doing, what the association is going to be doing, and then the end result is everyone works together and brings those mosaic little pieces, and you have a community that genuinely creates this opportunity for everyone to get back to normal as quickly as possible. And so getting the debris staged and ready from an individual owner standpoint, from the homeowners association and condominium standpoint and townhome standpoint, for the CDD to then come in and pick it up, and or the municipality, that provides the coordination of it getting removed as quickly as possible at the minimal expense to the association and the individual property owner. And if you tell them, the association members, that this is what's gonna get done, and you work with the other agencies in advance, behind the scenes, pre-storm, and everyone is engaged and brings to the table what resource and responsibility that they're supposed to do, it gets executed. And so the 2016 storm and then the 2017 storms, the association that I'm talking about, it had a much quicker and more collaborative cleanup the second and third time around, so that the association, literally was back to business as usual in the quickest amount of time. And so, we were being reactive on how bad the storm hits, but the proactive work allows the reactive element to not be maddening and just mayhem. And so again, your action item list, as I said, your foundation is: when does it start? What are the association going to do, or other municipal entities or other associations that are involved are going to do? What is the expectation of the owner? And then when the association has to engage vendors, you go to them in advance, best practices, identify an hourly rate, what man-hour rate, identify their scope to do as soon as they get in there without question, and then identify things that are on hold to hear from the community manager or board president, and have checkpoints along the way. Day one, noon, whatever it is, twice a day, and have places to meet. So I'm going to talk one other thing. Large associations, as far as coordinating efforts with multiple entities, and we went to as far as identifying a radio frequency local channel where the association and the CDD and key people in the community, block leaders, if you want to call them, all have these radios, and they can actually interact on a local channel and have checkpoints and protocols that allow them to communicate when there's no phone lines and no other resources out there. So this association identified that was a benefit and a need to post-storm activities, and so we've put that all in play. And so I'm going to turn this over to Rich in just a second. We want to talk a little bit about, I think you want to talk about flood issues and those types of things. But your protocol now has when it starts, what each major player is going to do and how they're going to do it, and with what vendor and at what cost. And so now when you come out of that storm and you understand your insurance policy, you understand what your vendors are going to charge you, there is a fiduciary responsibility that has been met to the best possibility that you could ever imagine in a hurricane event. And that's what the association is responsible for, is to fulfill its responsibilities and do it as being fiscally responsible as possible, but for the betterment of the entire community as defined by your covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So, and I know Rich wanted to talk a little, we got a few more minutes here before the hour's up, but Rich wanted to talk a little bit about flood insurance and make sure people understand kind of that dynamic.
Thanks, Troy. Yeah, I wanted to talk about flood, but I also wanted to talk about another coverage that you actually brought up to me the other day, which is very important. It can play a big part in hurricanes. It's called law and ordinance coverage. And so what that's going to do, it's more important for older properties. I would say the older the property is, the more important it is, but it can be important for newer properties as well. What that's going to do is going to pay a differential. For example, if you have a claim and we can't build it the same way, we have a portion or the total part of the structure is damaged, and we can't rebuild it to the way it used to be because there's been a change in a law or an ordinance. It could be an ADA thing. It could be just the way that the local municipality has changed their laws with height restrictions, or maybe it's a fire code thing. But for whatever reason, we either can't build the same structure that we had before, or we've got to build it in a different way now. And we're going to incur additional costs because of that. It could be because now we got to tear down the old building, even because we can't rebuild it. Or it could be because we got to add new features to the new building that or the repairs that we're doing because of some kind of change in ordinance and law. And what can happen is if that's not in place, and it would be part of your property coverage. If it's not in place, you can end up with the insurance company saying, yes, here's the money to rebuild the building that you had. We realize it doesn't comply anymore and you're not going to be allowed to build it, but here's the set sum of money. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come up with the extra 10, 20, or 30% to build it to code now. So you want to make sure that's one of the things you definitely want to look. Most policies, we're going to try to include that, but sometimes when other agents or uneducated board members are shopping insurance, they will cut something like that out to try to get a lower premium. Not always a good idea. It's something you definitely need to weigh and you need to look out for, and then weigh your options, cost versus risk there. Now, flood insurance, flood's an interesting coverage. It's in most cases not going to be included with your property policy. Usually it's a separate policy, and usually through the National Flood Program. But There's often times where either because of your location, I have a couple associations that are in what's called coastal resource barrier areas, and they can't get the national flood program. So we have to go and get private flood options. And there's private flood options in other places that are sometimes more cost effective than the national program. But the difference between flood and a hurricane, because people will say, what do you mean flood's not covered? So if there's a hurricane and rain gets in here, it's not going to be covered. That's going to be covered under rain if there's damage to the building or the wind-driven rain, like we talked about before. Or if a pipe breaks in your building, usually that's a flood. We would all call this a flood in our building, but by definition, it's not considered a flood. But that's usually covered under your property policy. A flood, one of two things are going to happen for there to be a flood. It's either rising water around your location. So that would mean like the parking lot's flooding. Now the retention pond next door is flooding, and the water just keeps coming up until eventually it comes into your unit or your building. That's rising water. The other thing that we would worry about, especially for those folks on coastal area, on the coast there, it's storm surge. So the waves keep coming bigger, coming up higher, and before you know it, they're rolling into your back slider. That's storm surge. And those both of those things are not going to be covered under your standard property policy unless there's a flood endorsement. Normally that's going to be covered under a separate flood policy. Just because you don't live in what's called a high hazard zone. So if you live in a high hazard flood zone, you're pretty much going to be required, if there's any kind of lending going on, either by the association or by your unit owners, you're going to be required to have flood. So in other words, if you're in a high hazard zone and your unit owners want to get mortgages, they're going to require that the association have, the lender is going to want to know the association has flood insurance. If you're not in a flood zone though, which a lot of places aren't, even though we're all here in Florida, we're near the coast, we're not necessarily in a flood zone. So they're saying it's not likely that you could flood, but you still could. And I think the statistic is something like 40% of flood claims come from things that are or flood assistance come from properties that are not in flood zones. And an example would be you have a property and you've lived there for 30 years and it's never even come close to flooding. But all of a sudden down the street, they tore down the apartment complex was there and they built a shopping center. And now things are different. Drainage is different. Things have changed. So just because things have always been a certain way and the water has always drained or flowed a certain way in your neighborhood for a number of years, there's always construction going on. Roads are changing. Things are happening. And that can become different in a hurry. And it just changes. It just takes like either adding a subdivision or building a new building next door that can change things. And now where you weren't going to flood before, now you possibly could. And if flood's not required, it's usually very affordable. So that's the silver lining on that. I would always, even if it's not a required policy to be carried, I would consider it and certainly get pricing on it and weigh the options yourself. Oh, I got on.
Good stuff. So again, back to the theme, horror story. So, I thought we were covered during a hurricane if we had a storm surge. Okay, so there's the note when you're contemplating insurance. If you're anywhere near, anywhere where a tidal, surge can affect, and we've seen the last, recent history where you have the higher tides and then you have the storm coming through at the same time. In areas that, haven't flooded in they talk about 100-year storm events, but haven't flooded in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and it may be something along the way that the association had the option to say, do I want to continue the flood policy or not? And what does it cost? And I want to keep my assessments at a certain level, and it may have gotten removed. And so as you evaluate your insurance solution, great question to understand, know what the history is, where you're at. And if you're not in a flood zone and you're not near the coast and you don't have any reason to believe a new shopping center or something's going to affect you, you make that decision as a board, not as an individual board member. You make that decision as a board, and you go through proper protocol to either include it or not in the policy. And same thing with the ordinance and law. And that was our discussion in preparing for this. Rich and I were talking, and I said, there's a lot of people that don't realize that if you have a portion of the building, or you have a multi-story building and the bottom 2 floors are affected, the other 3 or 4 floors above it, there's an endorsement that says, oh, we'll pay for the bottom 2 floors that had the loss, but we're not going to pay for you to rebuild the upper 3 floors because they weren't affected. And if you don't have that coverage, then those other 3 floors, they get covered, they get funded through a special assessment or some type of gathering of funds, and the only other way to say that is special assessment. And same thing with the ordinance law. If you're repairing a portion of the building, it's my understanding that if there's something that changed and you have $100,000 loss, and it's going to cost you an additional $25,000 to restore it to code, even if you're doing very, very similar or the exact same thing, but it has to be built a different way, that $25,000, that additional expense, comes out of the association's funds. And if you don't have them, it's the insurance is only going to pay out $100,000. That $25,000 gets pulled from reserves or through a special assessment.
Unit owners, yep.
Yeah, and so to recap this, and we'll open up for a little bit of Q&A. Communication is the last thing that I would say is a best practice. I talked a little bit about it before. Your protocol, your plan, your pre-storm and post-storm e-blast notices, all of that stuff is integral in keeping everyone informed. And so it shouldn't be overlooked. It shouldn't be expected that everyone knows what to do. And we've told them, we kind of went through this a year ago, so they should know. No, put it out there. There's no secrets. The association is not the board and its what it's planning is not some secret society that no one should know about. The association has been elected to make decisions and communicate protocols, rules, regs, all of those things. And this is one of those things that you want to convey to the membership on a regular basis. And it's important that you think all of the different opportunities that you have pre-storm and post-storm after an event, and how you can make those better. So that to me is one of the things that in the last few years, we've had a couple of storm events. It wasn't necessarily overlooked, but we as an association realized that if we don't stay on top of that and we don't communicate to our membership regularly, there's lots of questions, because it's not necessarily panic, but people just want to hear that something's being done and have something to look forward to. And that's how you develop that sense of community. So if there's anyone on the call that wants to unmute and ask a question, we'd be happy to try and answer it as best we can. So we'll kind of open that up for the next few minutes. If anyone wants to speak up, please do at this time.
Gentlemen, this is Dave Valinsky.
Okay.
You hear me? Okay.
Yes, sir.
David?
We've had some, in the past, I've heard some nightmares of the assigned benefits to the insurance company after a storm when a contractor has come in. I know from past experiences some nightmares where the contractors have received the assigned benefits and then didn't perform the work but took money. And then there was a big lawsuit between the insurance company and then the contractor. Is there ever a situation where the assigned benefits would be beneficial?
Well, I'll tell you this. Originally, the assigned benefits were designed to protect the consumer and to advocate as an advocation for the consumer, which would be you, the insured. And the way that was intended, the intent of that was to make it easier for in an emergency or a disaster or a situation where you can't get somebody from the insurance company out right away. You're a homeowner. You don't know what to do. You want to protect your property. You don't necessarily have the funds to pay this contractor to do the work that needs to be done. So in order to facilitate getting things done rapidly, you sign off and they start cleaning up and repairing and doing whatever. And when it's done properly in that system, it's usually it can be a good situation and it can work well. What I would find out is usually whether it's your particular individual homeowners, your HO6, your condo unit policy, or it's your master policy, there's normally some preferred vendors that each insurance company will work with. I would try to get a list of those in advance. And if it's one of those preferred vendors, I would feel comfortable signing that. If it's not, I would not feel, I wouldn't, I don't see how a situation could present itself to me that I would feel comfortable with a stranger showing up, signing over an assignment of benefits form with them. I just think it's especially because a lot of these people, I said earlier, they're watching their whole business model is preparing at hurricane season. They get ready, they get geared up, and they watch the hurricanes, and they're packed and ready and mobile. And when that hurricane hits, they're en route and they're coming. And maybe they stay in town long enough to collect deposits, and maybe they do the work, maybe they don't. You just don't know. It's hard to. Nothing against anybody from Texas or anywhere else that comes from far away to help us out, but if they don't have an address within 50 miles from where I am, I really don't feel comfortable with them doing my work unless they've got some kind of contract with my insurance carrier. That's
Great question.
Thanks. That's a great explanation. I appreciate it.
Great question. Anyone else that wants to ask something specific, a circumstance, or share a story? Okay, I don't see anyone.
I think, Troy, I was going to say, if we'll probably send our contact information out to all these folks, right?
Yep.
If you guys ever want to just give me a call or shoot me an email with any kind of question, I'm always happy just to answer those questions.
Yep. Diane had I said this earlier, had a family emergency this morning, so she will likely be following up with everyone and making sure that everyone got whatever information they need during it and or after it. Looks like Alicia, you may have a question. If you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, do you have any recommendations for basically finding someone that we can rely on to come out and do things like remove trees out of emergency access and owner access? We have somebody that comes out, but just even the general annual tree cleanup that we have him do, he can be a little unreliable. And I feel like if it was the situation of a storm where multiple people are calling, that it wouldn't happen.
So the very, very hard to pinpoint an exact vendor. I'm not sure, Alicia, what area are you in? You're in Daytona, Flagler County, somewhere?
I'm in Daytona.
Daytona, okay. Do we manage your association?
No.
No, okay. I would have to understand a little bit of the scope, and I would put one of our, we have two offices, one in Daytona and one in Palm Coast. I'd put one of our leaders down there, just to kind of make a recommendation or two. And we work with, 3,000, 4,000 vendors across Volusia and Flagler County. A good portion of them are landscape related type things. So I just, not knowing the scope of your community, I can recommend them. We just, it's unfortunate that you get a vendor who can do your work at a reasonable price. Just sometimes reliability is an issue. The best thing that I can advise is to try and identify, and if we can be the resource for it, we'll try, but try and identify those vendors that you want to kind of have an agreement with them in advance. And the agreement would be something as simple as, we want you within a certain period of time, first day, second day, to come in, do this, remove all the debris, clear access, whatever it is. And we want you to identify man hours to do it. I don't think a price for man hours. I don't necessarily see the need for a huge deposit or not. I can't imagine that if I'm a board member, president, whatever, I would pay a retainer. I would probably have 2, maybe 3 people in the queue and say, hey, when we call you, can you come within X number of days, and see if you can't get 2 or 3 stacked. And if the first guy doesn't show up, move to the second one.
Okay, thank you.
No. And
that probably would work best for us because we're just a super small
Yeah,
community.
yeah. I mean, there's lots of big vendors that are around town that, you know, if you can negotiate with them now and just say, hey, we want you to do our work, and we're willing to pay a little bit of a premium for it. You're not going to get the you know, the $6 an hour or $8 an hour work, but if the assurance is that they're going to come in and they're going to do it and they can knock it out, you know, and then they can work right down the street and start working on some other associations doing the same thing. So,
All right. Thank you.
okay. Anyone else? All right. We really appreciate Dr. Carlton. Is that you? No. Okay. We really appreciate everyone participating today. Hopefully the audio and everything was good, and everyone, it didn't seem like there was any technical difficulties. If there were, please, you know, Diane's going to send out a survey and our information post meeting either later today or tomorrow, and you'll be able to relay that information to her. And again, my good friend Rich, I really appreciate you kind of joining us today and being a resource for some of our local associations.
My pleasure, Troy. Thank you for having me.
All righty, everyone. Thank you all. Hopefully we'll talk to you all soon.
Take care, guys.